Hello, my name is Adelise, and my parents told me Grandma was fine, just resting, they said. But the truth? They moved her without telling me, forged papers behind my back, and said I'd abandoned her. They even shut me out of her deathbed. All while smiling at church, telling neighbors I was the one who never called. But what if I told you? I have the receipts, the recordings, the legal proxy they buried to erase me. And what happens when the forgotten granddaughter refuses to stay silent? What happens when the red folder comes out? Would you believe how far a family will go to erase one of their own? Or how far one woman will go to make sure her grandmother is remembered? Truthfully, do you want to know what I did next? It was a quiet Thursday morning when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I was standing in the kitchen, pouring the last of the coffee into my thermos, already running late for work. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something in my gut told me not to. Hello? I answered, distracted, balancing my phone between my cheek and shoulder while searching for my car keys. A woman's voice replied, soft but deliberate. Miss Adelise? Yes. Speaking. This is Janice. I used to work at Meadow Pines, the assisted living facility where your grandmother stayed. My hand stopped midair. Used to? I've recently retired. That's not why I'm calling, though. I thought you should know. Etta isn't doing well. She's been transferred out. And she's been asking for you. I stood still. Completely still. Transferred out? Wait, what? What do you mean transferred? To where? I asked, the words tumbling over each other. I'm not sure. I only know they moved her last week. I thought you would have been told. Her voice dropped, as if we were sharing a secret neither of us wanted to own. But I guess not. I didn't even remember ending the call. All I knew was that by the time I sat in the driver's seat, the keys were in the ignition, and my hands were shaking. The next few hours were a blur of unanswered calls and blocked access. My mother didn't answer. My father sent me straight to voicemail. When I called Meadow Pines, the woman on the other end of the line paused for a beat too long before saying, I'm sorry, Miss Adelise. You're not listed as an approved contact anymore. What? There's been a change to the access list. No, listen, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm her granddaughter. I've always been allowed to see her. I understand, she said, but her tone made it clear she didn't intend to help. Your name was removed last month. Only Mr. and Mrs. Mace are authorized at this time. Betrayal doesn't always feel like a knife. Sometimes it feels like a locked door where you used to be welcomed. They hadn't just kept something from me. They'd removed me, erased me from her story. That night, I sat in my apartment playing my mother's last voicemail on a loop. The message was barely 15 seconds long. Hey, sweetie, just checking in. Grandma's been resting a lot these days. Nothing serious, just old age doing its thing. No need to stress or fly over, okay? We've got it handled. Love you. Now I could hear it for what it was, a script, rehearsed, sanitized, delivered with a fake warmth only my mother could master. I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I made the drive across town, taking the longer route on purpose just to gather my thoughts. Their house hadn't changed. Still the beige siding with blue shutters, still the porch swing that creaked when no one was sitting in it. I parked across the street, sat there for a moment, then stepped out. My mother opened the door before I could even knock. She stood there in a pressed blouse, coffee in hand, completely unfazed. You're early, she said. You didn't tell me Grandma was sick. She tilted her head slightly. I didn't think it was urgent. You moved her without telling me. She sipped her coffee, looking past me like I was a telemarketer on her doorstep. Adelise, you're overreacting. She's fine, just tired. You know how she gets. I turned toward the hallway, hoping to hear some voice, some sign, but the house felt too quiet, like something had been vacuumed out of it. My father appeared behind her, slower, eyes lowered. She's old, Adelise, he said. Let her rest. There it was, the phrase. The excuse that sounds like concern but is really dismissal. They knew, they'd known, and they chose silence. The drive back was heavier. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The city passed in blurs of red lights and blurred windows. I don't remember how I got home, only that I walked straight to the cabinet where I kept all my just-in-case files. I opened a folder labeled Family Legal, pulled out what I had: old letters from Grandma, medical forms she'd asked me to hold on to after her fall 2 years ago, a copy of her living will, a sticky note with her handwriting, faint but still hers. "Keep this for me, just in case." Just in case. Well, this was the case, and I wasn't going to be shut out of it. When I was 8, I came home from school sobbing after a boy told me my front teeth looked like piano keys. I had run into the backyard, hiding by the lilac bush. Etta found me there, with 2 mugs of hot cocoa and a blanket draped over her shoulder. "They don't see you now," she said gently, "but one day they'll hear you clearly." That's who she was to me, not just a grandmother. She was the only person who ever made me feel like I wasn't invisible. I had missed birthdays, family dinners, job promotions, even a breakup. But I wasn't going to miss this, not because she was dying, but because she was being hidden. Vera Lynette had decided I didn't deserve a seat at the table, but I'd always kept a key, even if I had to build the table myself. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I filed the documents, organized my copies, labeled a new folder ETA, urgent in all caps. And then, I sat on my floor in the glow of a single lamp and planned the first move. I didn't have a full strategy yet, but I had something better. I had clarity. And my mother? She had just handed me the match. By mid-morning the following day, the drizzle had settled into a steady, chilly mist that clung to everything it touched. I pulled into the narrow lot beside Meadow Pines, the care home where Grandma Etta had lived the past few years, and parked directly in front of the main entrance. The building hadn't changed: white siding with pale green shutters, cheerful flower beds out front. But I had. I stepped out, pulled my coat tighter, and walked straight to the double glass doors. The receptionist looked up, her name tag reading Cheryl, the same woman I'd spoken to on the phone the day before. Her polite expression flickered the moment she saw me. I didn't bother pretending to be patient this time. "I need to see Etta Florian," I said, voice level, firm. She blinked once, then turned to her screen. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mace." "Adelise," I corrected, sharply. She swallowed. "Ms. Adelise, your visitation status hasn't been updated. You're still marked as restricted under her current care designation. Only Mr. and Mrs. Mace are listed as approved family contacts." I let the words sink in just long enough to sting, then asked, "And who authorized that?" She hesitated. "The records show a request from the family, specifically Mrs. Lynette." Of course. I could almost hear my mother's voice in that phrasing. For her own peace, she needs calm. She doesn't need outside stressors. "Did anyone bother to ask Etta what she wanted?" I said, my tone more cut glass than silk. Cheryl avoided eye contact and tapped her keyboard with a kind of bureaucratic helplessness. I stepped back from the counter. I was trying to stay composed, but I could feel the familiar burn rising behind my eyes. Not tears, fury. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, hoping maybe it was someone useful. Instead, a text from my mother blinked onto the screen. "She doesn't want to see you. Let her rest." That was it. No greeting, no explanation, just that flat sentence, like it had been cut and pasted from a PR memo. I walked back to my car, climbed inside, and sat behind the wheel without turning the key. The windows began to fog. I stared at the building, trying to imagine what was happening inside. Was Grandma lying in bed, looking at the door, wondering why I never came? Did she think I'd forgotten her? Or worse, that I didn't care? The idea of her thinking I had abandoned her sliced through me sharper than any insult. She had always been the one person who showed up. When I had appendicitis in college and my parents didn't drive the 4 hours to see me, Grandma did. When I lost my first job and didn't tell anyone because I was ashamed, she was the one who mailed me a handwritten card with $50 and a note. Sometimes, starting over is the only way to do it right. And now, she was the one being erased, and I was being painted out with her. I stayed there for nearly an hour, didn't cry, didn't move, just sat and tried to breathe through the weight. Eventually, I drove home. Traffic was light. My apartment felt cold, even though the heater had been running. I dropped my purse by the door and made a beeline for the storage chest at the foot of my bed. It was full of things I didn't like looking at often. Old birthday cards, photos, trinkets from college. But beneath it all, in a thin envelope pressed between a faded folder and a wrapped ornament, was something I hadn't seen in years. My name, written in curling letters across the front. Adelise. Grandma's handwriting. A little shaky, but still hers. I sat on the floor and opened it. And inside was a single piece of paper, cream-colored, aged just slightly. The letter read, "If they ever shut you out, don't believe them. My voice still calls for you. You were never the problem. You were the reason I kept going." I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until I reached the last line. My eyes scanned it again and again, as if afraid it would vanish. I folded the letter carefully, then stood and crossed the room. I removed a framed photograph from my shelf and replaced it with the letter. It didn't belong in a drawer. It belonged where I could see it. This wasn't just a note. It was proof that I wasn't imagining things, that someone else, someone who mattered, saw the truth. I was not overreacting. I was not dramatic. I was being eliminated by design. And I was done letting it happen. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a legal pad. My thoughts clicked into order the way they always did when I was working a difficult case. What do I know? Grandma trusted me enough to leave me that letter. I had sent her birthday gifts, letters, care packages, even when I was swamped with work. She never told me she didn't want to see me. My name had been removed from her visitor list, and now my mother had the audacity to text me like I was some distant nuisance. What else? Somewhere in my records was a copy of the power of attorney Grandma had asked me to keep. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I knew where it was. I just needed to confirm if it was still valid. I reached for the folder labeled Family Legal. Inside, a stack of files, medical notes, old insurance forms, and finally, a manila envelope that felt heavier than the rest. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I stared at the note in the frame. That letter wasn't only my emotional anchor. It was now the center of a new map. I wasn't sure of my full plan yet, but I knew one thing. The next time someone tried to tell me I wasn't part of my grandmother's life, I'd have more than words to throw back. I'd have paper, proof, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the ending. Later that evening, as I was sifting through the documents again, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Dad. I watched it ring. I didn't answer. Because this time, I wasn't waiting to be told anything. I didn't answer my father's call. Instead, I pulled out a roll of painter's tape and a stack of sticky notes. If they wanted to erase me, I'd leave a trail too solid to scrub out. I cleared the dining table and dragged a corkboard out of the closet. Within an hour, I had pinned receipts, shipping labels, birthday card copies, and hand-scrawled dates across a grid of months. I linked them with red thread, like some detective chasing down a serial offender. This wasn't about some mix-up anymore. It was methodical, clean, like someone had planned my removal from Eda's life while smiling in my face. I stepped back and stared at the web forming on the board. Every photo of a care package I'd sent, every confirmation email from the delivery service, every payment line from my bank account. I opened my laptop and downloaded my bank statements for the last 18 months. It was all there, monthly payments, always on the 15th, to Meadow Pines, under the memo line, EF Care Supplement. I matched those records with the stories Vera had been spreading. At a family gathering last spring, she told my cousin Lauren, "Adelise hasn't visited since Christmas before last. She's emotionally distant. We all just pray she finds peace with herself." Peace with myself? Or peace from exposing hers? And then the memory, like a crack splitting the surface of an old sidewalk, unnoticeable until it swells. Thanksgiving, 12 years old. I'd walked into the kitchen quietly, barefoot. No one noticed me at first. Vera was by the stove, arms crossed, her voice low but cutting. "Your mom is dead weight, Harlan. Always whining, always needing something. And now she's got Adelise trailing after her like a puppy. She's grooming that girl to be just like her. Another needy drain." My father had been drying dishes. He didn't argue, didn't flinch. Just kept moving the towel across the plate like none of it surprised him. It was one of those moments you tuck away, thinking you'll forget, until one day it surfaces with every word intact. So this wasn't new. They'd always believed Etta was a burden. They just got bolder with time. The phone buzzed again, a text this time, from a cousin in Ohio. "Hey, heard from Aunt Vera that you've been a little detached lately. Everything okay?" Detached? I didn't respond right away. I forwarded him my monthly payment summary, then added, "Let me know if Aunt Vera wants to compare receipts." 5 minutes later, he replied with a thumbs up and nothing else. He knew. I stared at the board again, at the lined-up months, the neat pattern of care and distance, how they mirrored each other, the visual proof of love met with erasure. It wasn't about money, it was about memory, about rewriting someone's life story without their permission. About replacing the truth with a version that suited the guilty. They weren't just keeping me from Etta, they were rewriting her legacy, cutting out the parts that made them uncomfortable. And for that, I couldn't stay silent. I opened the bottom drawer of my file cabinet and pulled out the envelope labeled Etta POA. I hadn't touched it since the day she gave it to me. I unfolded the crisp pages slowly, careful not to tear the edges. There it was, her signature, in pen slightly smudged at the end. Witnessed, notarized, dated. It hadn't expired. She had given me the legal right to act on her behalf in the event she couldn't advocate for herself. And now, here I was, watching the people who shared my blood weaponize silence and paperwork to undo that. I added it to the red folder that was starting to take shape on the edge of the dining table. This wasn't about revenge. This was about restoration. They wanted to reduce her story to a footnote, a fragile old woman who slept too much and remembered too little. But Etta Florian wasn't forgettable. She was the kind of woman who paid cash, folded her receipts into thirds, and carried peppermint candies in every coat pocket, just in case. The kind who wrote handwritten notes on the back of grocery lists and called every Tuesday without fail, even when I was too busy to answer. She saw me when others chose not to, and I would return the favor. I took a photo of the power of attorney. I emailed a copy to myself and one to my personal email with the subject line, "Use if necessary, truth doesn't expire." Then I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Dr. Roy's number. He hadn't returned my last message yet, but I had a feeling he'd answer this one. My message was short. I need to talk to someone who knew the truth before they started rewriting it. Can we meet? I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need to. I was no longer playing defense. I was building the case. By the third morning since I opened that old manila envelope, I had only one thing on my mind: find someone who hadn't learned to lie in my mother's tone of voice. I called Meadow Pines just after 9 a.m., asked for the administrator, and told her I needed to update my own legal file. It was a partial truth. I did need to verify what was in the records, but mostly, I wanted eyes on the paperwork they'd been using to keep me out. The director, a pleasant woman named Michelle, with a voice like she'd been trained in customer service since birth, agreed to meet me mid-morning. When I arrived, the weather was heavy. Gray skies, a low hum of thunder in the distance, like a warning growl from something still pacing just out of sight. I carried a messenger bag, the red folder tucked inside. Michelle greeted me at the front desk and led me through a locked hallway toward a small office in the back. The walls were cream, the chairs a corporate shade of teal, and the air smelled faintly of printer ink and old flowers. She motioned for me to sit, pulled up Etta's digital record on her monitor. "Let me just verify a few entries here," she said, fingers tapping quietly on the keyboard. "We had a recent care plan update. Here we are?" I leaned forward slightly. A line of text caught my eye. Bolded, added only a month ago. "Patient has expressed a desire to limit visits to designated primary caregivers only." My spine went cold. I asked, "Who wrote that?" She turned her head toward me, blinking like she didn't understand the question. "It's listed as part of the update from the family." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated, then said, "It's common in cases where the family wants to ensure peace and stability, especially when the patient is older, more fragile. But my grandmother was still speaking clearly last time I saw her." And she never said anything about limiting visits. I understand, she replied carefully, but there was that tone again, polished deflection. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the screen. The click echoed louder than it should have. Michelle didn't stop me. Maybe she knew there was nothing she could say that wouldn't make it worse. They had institutionalized a lie, not just spoken it, but coded it, saved it, assigned it a timestamp. Back outside, the sky had darkened, wind picking up along the sidewalk. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I parked near the university library and waited. Dr. Cassian Roy taught a health policy course on Tuesdays. I knew his office was just across the quad. He'd been Etta's primary physician for 5 years before he retired, though no one ever really said why. I had a theory now. Just after noon, I saw him walking toward the faculty lot, messenger bag slung over one shoulder, a coffee thermos in hand. "Dr. Roy?" I called out. He paused, turned, and smiled slightly when he saw me. "Adelise," he said, "it's been a long time." We sat in the corner of a coffee shop across the street, the kind with mismatched chairs and overfilled bookshelves. "I'll get right to it," I said. "Did you step away from Etta's case? Or were you removed?" His face changed, not dramatically, just enough that his jaw tightened, his posture straightened. She was doing well, considering her age, wanted to continue rehab after the fall. Then suddenly I was told the family had opted for palliative-only care, that my involvement was no longer required. "Which family member?" He didn't hesitate. "Your mother." "And you didn't question it?" "I did," he said, voice low. "But I was told I was too emotionally invested." I exhaled sharply. He reached into his bag, pulled out a folder, not the red kind, but a plain one. He slid a printout across the table. "This is from 6 months ago. Etta signed it herself, requested continuation of physical therapy, and outlined her preference for non-palliative support. The document was clear, her signature visible. The date aligned with the time Vera started excluding me. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked. He looked genuinely regretful. "I assumed you knew. I didn't want to step into family politics." Politics. That was the word people always used when they didn't want to admit they'd chosen comfort over conflict. "I should have said something," he added quietly. "I failed her." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "You didn't fail her. You were silenced. Like me. The only difference is, I'm not staying quiet anymore." We left the cafe an hour later. He promised to email me a scanned version of the document, said I could use his name if it came to it. I told him I hoped it wouldn't, but we both knew it probably would. Back in my car, I sat with my hands resting on the steering wheel. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror and whispered, "Let's see them try to rewrite this." By the time I got home, the wind had kicked up into a full-blown pre-storm howl. I took off my coat, hung it by the door, and placed the new document into the red folder. Each page in that folder was no longer just a record. It was a piece of someone's truth they tried to delete. I sat on the couch and dialed. This time, I wasn't calling for answers. I was calling to deliver a message. My mother answered on the third ring. "Adelise," she said, dry as ever, "didn't expect to hear from you today." "I know about Dr. Roy," I said flatly. "I know you had him removed. I know about the altered chart, the note about visitors. You've rewritten a lot, but you don't get to rewrite me." There was silence, not long, but heavy. Then, a breath. "Careful, Adelise," she said, her voice lower. "You've always been so emotional." I smiled into the silence, not because it was funny, because it was familiar. That was how she deflected accountability. Dismissal wrapped in etiquette, a knife dressed as advice. "I'm not emotional," I said. "I'm prepared." I ended the call. The moment I ended that call with my mother, I sat in the silence of my apartment, letting the stillness stretch. She could call me emotional all she wanted. I had something better than emotions now. I had evidence. And with evidence came power. It was already past 9. Outside, the sky had dipped into that pale gray blue, the kind that made everything feel slightly off. The cold had settled in for the evening, pushing against the windows in slow, persistent gusts. I didn't bother turning on the TV. Instead, I walked to the storage closet just off the hallway and pulled out 3 plastic bins stacked awkwardly on top of each other. Each one was labeled in my handwriting: taxes, work stuff, and the bottom one, Mom's junk. I pulled that one out last. I spent the next hour on the floor of my living room, surrounded by old manila folders, envelopes warped by time, and documents that smelled faintly of dust and lemon-scented furniture polish. At the very bottom, under a stack of expired coupons and a crumpled holiday card from a decade ago, I found what I'd been hoping for. The label was handwritten, Etta Legal Docs. I didn't need a light show. The truth didn't need dramatic music or stage direction. All it needed was that file. Inside, right where I remembered, was the power of attorney form. 3 years old, signed, notarized, witnessed, and in perfectly legible handwriting, Etta had named me, as her sole medical proxy. She hadn't chosen Vera. She hadn't defaulted to Harlan. She had chosen me. My hands shook a little as I scanned it into my phone, saved 3 copies, and emailed one to myself with the subject line: "Never let them say this didn't happen." What my mother had done wasn't an oversight. It wasn't confusion. It was calculated. A quiet, systematic effort to cut me out. That night, I pulled out my red folder. It wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was becoming a case file. I slid the power of attorney inside, next to the photo of Etta's altered medical chart, next to Dr. Roy's signed treatment order, next to the letter Etta had written me. Each piece of paper wasn't just documentation, it was a wound. They hadn't stabbed me in the back. They'd paper cut me to death. Slowly, quietly, I went to bed with the red folder beside my nightstand. By late morning the next day, the weather had turned colder, the wind sharper. I bundled up, grabbed the folder, and drove to a small diner on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous: vinyl booths, coffee that never quite tasted fresh, and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the early 2000s, but it was where Gloria had agreed to meet me. She arrived exactly on time, coat zipped up to her chin, eyes scanning the room before they landed on me. She walked over, slid into the booth across from me, and ordered decaf. We didn't waste time. "I heard you left Meadow Pines," I said. "I did," she replied, quietly. "Why?" She stirred her coffee, eyes not leaving mine. "Because I couldn't keep watching what was happening to your grandmother. It wasn't right." I leaned forward slightly. She asked for you," Gloria continued. "Daily, not just in passing. She said your name like it was oxygen. They told her you were too busy. They'd unplug her phone, said it was better for her health not to be worked up." I felt a slow ache crawl up my spine. "I thought maybe they didn't know better," Gloria said. But after a while it became clear. This wasn't care. This was control. Twist S13 didn't just hit. It hollowed something out inside me. "They lied to her about me?" I asked. Gloria nodded. "I left when I realized I was part of the lie by staying." Silence hung between us for a moment, the kind that fills every corner and leaves no room for anything else. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I wrote this for you," she said. "It's a witness statement. Everything I saw, everything I heard." I took it with both hands. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You're not alone," she replied, "even if they want you to feel like you are." We talked for a few more minutes. Nothing heavy. She told me about her new job, her daughter's graduation. Before she left, she said one more thing. "I couldn't take part in burying someone while she was still breathing. Your grandmother deserves better." I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the folded paper in front of me. That afternoon, I added Gloria's letter to the red folder, slid it in right behind the power of attorney, like one truth stacking onto another. Later that evening, after I'd eaten something half-hearted and reheated, my phone buzzed again. Voicemail from my father. I didn't answer, just listened. His voice was low, hesitant. "Adelise, listen. Maybe this has all gotten a little out of hand. You know how your mom is. She means well, but if you start making this official, it's going to turn ugly. Let's not do that, okay? Don't stir things up. You're going to make this worse than it needs to be." He hung up without waiting for a response. I played the message twice, saved it to the cloud, then saved it to the red folder, just for good measure. It wasn't a threat. It was fear. They knew I was getting closer. That morning, the sun was too bright for how I felt. It had that unnerving clarity, the kind of light that made your reflection in a car window feel more like a stranger than yourself. But the cold wind hadn't softened. It still scraped along the buildings like it was looking for a fight. I pulled into the small lot behind the county assessor's office and parked in the corner, away from other cars. I sat there for a minute, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The red folder was in the passenger seat. I grabbed it, got out, and headed inside. The lobby smelled like paper and old linoleum. A clerk with hair tied back too tightly and a pink cardigan sat behind the front counter, eyes already scanning her monitor. "Hi," I said, calmly. "I'm here to pull the most recent deed record for a property under Etta Florian's name." She didn't blink, just typed. "Do you have a parcel number?" "No," I said, "but I have the full address. And I'm family." "That's fine," she replied. "It's public record. Give me a moment." She clicked through a few screens, then hit print. The printer hummed behind her desk and spat out 3 pages, which she stapled neatly and handed to me across the counter. "Looks like the property was transferred 2 months ago," she said, glancing at the header. "From Etta Florian to Harlan Mace and Vera Lynette. Executed February 4th. Recorded February 8th. I stared at the sheet, blinking once, slowly. "Signed by Etta?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "Yes." "Notarized." I felt something tighten behind my ribs. She was already being sedated around that time, already deteriorating in a way they had conveniently labeled as comfortable. There was no way she had the awareness or the strength to sign legal real estate documents 4 days before that note appeared in her medical chart. "I'd like a certified copy," I said, voice even. "Sure," the clerk replied, and moved to the copier. I took a picture of the document with my phone while she wasn't looking, just in case. Less than an hour later, I was walking up the stone path toward Meadow Pines. The wind was stronger now, tossing stray petals from a dying tulip arrangement near the front steps. I had faxed my proxy documents in the night before. I knew my name would be on the list this time, and I knew Vera would be waiting. Inside the lobby, everything looked as it always did. Too clean, too quiet, too calm. But the tension in the air could have sliced concrete. They were there. Sitting side by side on the worn floral couch like a pair of judges, arms crossed, coats folded neatly across their laps. Harlan avoided my gaze. Vera didn't. She smiled, tight, sharp, rehearsed. "Well, well," she said loudly, just as 2 nurses passed by. "What a surprise! Should we roll out a red carpet for the estranged daughter?" I didn't flinch. I walked straight to the front desk. The nurse glanced at my folder, and I handed her 3 neatly clipped pages, my notarized proxy, Gloria's signed statement, and the full page of visitor rights now legally reinstated. "I have full access to my grandmother," I said. "You'll find all the documentation in her file." The nurse skimmed it quickly and nodded. "You're cleared to visit," she said. "Room 217. I turned to Vera, held her stare. "Estranged?" I said softly. "Funny, because the documents say otherwise." The edge in her eyes sharpened, but she didn't speak. I walked past them without another word. The hallway felt longer than I remembered, each step louder, heavier, until I reached room 217 and knocked lightly before stepping in. Etta was awake. She looked smaller than I remembered, tucked into blankets that dwarfed her frame. But her eyes, those eyes, were still hers, still knowing, still kind. Her gaze found mine. She didn't speak, but her fingers twitched gently, and I moved closer, reached out, held her hand. "I'm here, Grandma," I whispered. Her fingers squeezed mine, not hard, not desperate, just enough. She didn't need to say a word. We sat like that for 10 minutes. No nurses, no machines beeping out warnings, just her breath, and mine, and the silent conversation of people who know too much has already been said behind their backs. When I finally stood, Her eyes were still on me. I promised I'd come back soon, that this wasn't the end, that she hadn't been forgotten. The hallway back felt different, lighter, like the act of stepping into her room had peeled away a layer of grime I hadn't realized was covering me. But Vera wasn't gone. She stood by the exit, arms folded again, lips pressed into a line so thin it barely existed. "You think this is done?" she said, low, close to my ear. "You think a few forms change everything?" I didn't raise my voice. "No," I said, "but it changes who gets to speak on her behalf." She leaned in further. "You want war? Let's go. But don't think this ends with a few forms." I stepped around her, calm and steady. "I came prepared for a battle," I said, "but it's your reputation that won't survive it." I didn't wait for a response. The door closed behind me, shutting her out with the same finality she once tried to use on me. She still thought this was about pride. She had no idea it was about justice. 2 days after our showdown in the care home lobby, I returned, but not to visit Grandma this time. I walked through those same front doors with my red folder under one arm and a request sitting heavy on my tongue. It was just after 11 in the morning. The weather was indecisive, clouds rolling thick across the sky, parting now and then to let in bursts of light, like the truth itself, pushing through. I took it as a sign. At the front desk, I asked to speak with whoever managed the facility's security footage. A tech assistant named Lucas came out after a few minutes, probably expecting something minor. I introduced myself, showed him my legal proxy, and leaned in just enough to keep the conversation off the ears of the passing staff. "There was a Thursday," I told him, "about 2 months ago. My mother, Vera Lynette, met with Dr. Maddox in the consult room off Hall C. I need footage from that." He blinked, unsure. "I'm not looking to cause trouble," I said. "I just need to verify something." Lucas hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We keep footage for 90 days. If it's still on the server, I can check." I followed him down a back hallway lined with outdated staff photos and into a small office that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and plastic chairs. The monitor on his desk was cracked in one corner, but the system booted fine. He typed a few things, pulled up the interface, and started scrubbing through the date I'd given him. After about 10 minutes, there it was, a black and white still of my mother, standing just inside the consult room, her purse on the counter. "Do you want audio too?" Lucas asked. "If it's available." It was. We sat in silence, listening through cheap speakers as my mother's voice filled the room like she still owned it. "Just don't flag it," she was saying to Dr. Maddox. "Say she's stable, code it palliative, that way we can fast-track the release forms. We don't need delays right now. The sooner we move forward, the cleaner this stays." Maddox nodded. Didn't question it, just made a note in his folder. I sat there, stunned, but not surprised. It was confirmation, not revelation. My hands stayed still in my lap, but inside, I could feel something cold and precise settle into place. "I need a copy of this," I said. Lucas handed me a USB drive in a plain white sleeve. "You'll want to keep that safe." "Don't worry," I told him. "It's safer than she thinks." Back home, I plugged the drive into my laptop and watched it again, this time frame by frame, letting the weight of it land squarely where it should. They hadn't just lied to me. They hadn't just lied to Grandma. They'd manipulated a medical record to move property, sideline family, and streamline an inheritance under the guise of dignity. It wasn't just immoral. It might actually be illegal. As I organized files in the red folder, I remembered something else, something I'd signed a few months ago, a care directive update, my mother had called it. "Just legal housekeeping," she'd said over the phone. "You'll get an email from the facility. It's a quick click." I pulled up the email archive and found it, an e-signature form from the facility. I clicked through, read it again. In small gray text halfway down the page, nestled between harmless health preferences and emergency contact fields, was a line that chilled me. By signing, the undersigned relinquishes any previous legal decision-making capacity related to patient Etta Florian in favor of designated guardians Vera Lynette and Harlan Mace. Twist S9. They had tricked me. I had relinquished my own legal standing without knowing. They'd buried that line in the weeds, banking on my trust. I'm a legal analyst. I should have caught it. And yet, they still got me. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and forced myself not to spiral. This wasn't the time for shame. Shame was a trap that paralyzed. Guilt was only useful if you learned from it. I stood, stretched, and paced the apartment. Then I sat again and drafted a single-line email. I sent it to Dr. Roy, to Gloria, and to Rachel, my friend from law school who now worked in elder rights litigation. Subject: pattern. Body: this isn't a family disagreement. It's systemic manipulation, and I have documentation to prove it. Within 15 minutes, Rachel replied, "Let's talk. This isn't small." I knew she was right. This had never been small. It had just been quiet. Until now. I created a folder on my desktop labeled "For Release." I included the video footage, the forged care directive, my notarized proxy, the letter from Gloria, the medical record from Dr. Roy. I stripped the metadata, renamed the files, added context in a Word doc. Then I created an anonymous Gmail address and emailed the entire folder to 2 local journalists who covered elder care scandals and corruption in family estates. I gave no name, just context. This video was taken at Meadow Pines Assisted Living Facility on February 9th. It features staff members altering a patient's medical classification without consent. The patient is now being treated under a false directive supported by a fraudulent power transfer, full documentation attached. You can verify through public records. Start there. I hit send. Then I sat back, the weight of it settling. Not relief. Not yet. But something different. Conviction. I stared out the window. The clouds had thinned just enough to let sunlight through. It spilled across the table where the red folder sat, lighting up every corner of the paper inside. By the 4th day after I sent the footage, the air had shifted. The sky above Fort Collins was sharp and blue, the kind of winter morning that makes everything feel a little too crisp, too honest, the kind of day where secrets can't hide in shadows because there aren't any. I pulled into the hospital lot early, not for Etta's sake this time, though always for her, really, but because I'd been summoned. The call had come the night before. A hospital case manager named Lillian had left a voicemail asking me to attend a formal discussion regarding Etta's care plan. Her voice had been overly polite, almost clinical. I knew exactly why they were calling. I walked into the conference room with my red folder tucked tightly under my arm. It wasn't bulky, but it had weight. Enough weight to sink what they'd built. Inside the room were 3 people. Lillian, seated at the head of the table, Dr. Cassian Roy, sitting off to the side, eyes already on me, and a hospital ethics representative I didn't recognize. Vera and Harlan sat together like always, united in presence, if not in ethics. Vera was dressed like she was attending a board meeting, not a reckoning. Harlan wore that same blank expression I remembered from childhood, like he'd rather be mowing the lawn than confronting the truth. "Ms. Mace," Lillian began. I let the name roll off without correction. I was used to it. "We've reviewed the documents submitted, including medical history, patient directives, and legal proxy forms. You've asked to clarify your authority over Miss Florian's care and to challenge certain recent decisions." I opened the folder. First, the notarized proxy, dated 3 years prior. Second, a typed statement from Gloria, signed and witnessed. Third, the audio transcript from the footage. I'd transcribed it word for word. Fourth, a printed timeline with my own signature on the erroneous update form highlighted in yellow, alongside the line I never saw, the one where I unknowingly relinquished my rights. Fifth, a copy of the property transfer deed, including the date Etta had supposedly signed while under sedation. I passed copies to each person at the table. Dr. Roy cleared his throat. "I can confirm that Ms. Florian did not express or demonstrate desire for palliative-only care during my time with her. Any shift in that status occurred after I was removed from her case." Vera didn't flinch, but I noticed her right foot tapping. Lillian scanned the paperwork for several long seconds before setting her copy down and folding her hands. "From this point forward," she said carefully, "all decisions regarding Ms. Florian's medical care will go through Ms. Adelise Mace, As per her valid proxy status, previous overrides will be investigated separately. Vera's mouth opened, and for a split second, I saw the crack in her composure. "This is character assassination," she said sharply. "She's building a narrative on hearsay and misplaced paperwork." I kept my tone even. "No, this is character resurrection for someone you tried to erase." Harlan coughed softly. Vera didn't look at him. The meeting ended quietly. No applause, no gavel, just a silent acknowledgement that something massive had shifted. I left the conference room and headed toward Eda's floor. As I passed the nurse's station, a young RN flagged me down. "Ms. Mace, Eda's vitals dropped a few hours ago. There was an attempt to activate her DNR, but we saw your proxy come through. We didn't proceed." My legs moved before I could think. I reached her room in seconds, just as Dr. Roy arrived from another hallway, out of breath but focused. "She's still responsive," he said. "We're starting treatment." Inside, Eda was pale. Her breath came shallow, but it was there. I sat beside her, took her hand again, just like before. "They tried," I whispered, "but they failed." Her eyelids fluttered. Her eyes opened, just a little, but enough, and then she squeezed my hand. Not like before. Stronger. Not goodbye, recognition, confirmation. She saw me. After a few minutes, Dr. Roy gave her a mild sedative to help her rest, and I stepped into the hallway to breathe. The floor was unusually quiet. The hum of machines and soft buzz of intercoms felt far away. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even shaking. I was just still. That evening, news broke. A local online publication released an anonymous source story. The daughter who came back with documents, not drama. The headline felt surreal, but it was mine. The story outlined a quiet legal battle involving elder care rights, forged directives, property transfers, and a patient who nearly lost her voice, until someone fought for it. They didn't name me, not yet, but people in the community would know. The comments section filled fast. I knew something was off with that family. Bless that granddaughter. This happens more than people think. I hope the people responsible are held accountable. I forwarded the article to Rachel, to Gloria, to Dr. Roy. Then I turned off my phone and sat by the window, watching the sun slip behind the hills. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but a line had been drawn. 1 week after the article broke, the memorial was held. There were no glossy programs, no string quartets, no podiums draped in velvet, just a rented room in the community hall off Willow Creek Road, folding chairs lined up in modest rows, and a photo of Eda on a stand near the front, her smile frozen in time, surrounded by daisies from her old garden. People filtered in slowly that morning. Friends, former neighbors, a few staff from the care facility who had quietly called to ask if they could come. Some sat without speaking, others hugged me softly. There was no buzz of chatter like you'd expect at a social event, just the kind of silence that honors what's been lost and what's been uncovered. The sky outside was clear, still, the kind of quiet that usually only happens when snow is coming or after something heavy has finally lifted. I stood near the back for a while, watching, letting the room fill. Vera arrived late, of course. She walked in wearing a dark gray coat that probably cost more than my car and a scarf too perfect for the weather. Harlan trailed behind her like a shadow, unsure where to land. She moved like nothing had changed, but everything had. She had expected to speak, had emailed the organizers ahead of time with a draft of what she called a tribute. But when the service coordinator stood before the group, microphone in hand, she looked directly at me. "Before we begin," the woman said gently, "we've received a request as outlined in a personal letter written by Ms. Etta Florian herself. Her final wish was that her granddaughter, Adelise Mace, speak on her behalf today." Vera's expression cracked just slightly. Her lips parted in protest, but no words came. I walked to the front, red folder in hand. Not for show this time. It was empty now, but I needed the feel of it, like armor I wasn't ready to lay down just yet. I stood in front of the small crowd and let the quiet stretch for just a moment longer. Then I began. My grandmother was a woman who folded her dish towels just so, who saved birthday cards from gas station racks if she thought the message was better. She taught me how to plant tomatoes, how to write a check, and how to apologize when you're wrong, even if it's the last thing you want to do. I paused, letting that land. She never stopped asking for me, not once, even when others told her I wouldn't come. She believed in my voice when I had no idea what to do with it. And when I found myself on the outside of her life, it wasn't because she turned her back on me. It was because someone closed the door and locked it from the inside. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I didn't come here today to relitigate what happened, I continued. I came to say something simple. I made it back. And she saw me. Silence followed, deep and whole. Then, someone clapped. Another followed. Soon the room stood, not loudly, not performatively, but with the steady kind of respect reserved for truths that have earned their place. After the service, people came forward quietly. Some hugged, others shared small memories. Vera hovered near the back, never approaching me directly. A few members of the local church board stood with her briefly, then stepped away as if they remembered they had other things to do. Justice sometimes doesn't look like a courtroom. It looks like a woman in a power suit realizing no one is listening anymore. The next morning, I drove out to the cemetery just after sunrise. The air was cold, but still. I parked at the edge of the grass and walked the gravel path until I reached her grave. The headstone was simple, just her name, the dates, and one line beneath. She always saw. I knelt and placed the red folder at the base of the stone. It was empty, but its weight had never been about the papers. It had always been about the promise. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered. "I kept your voice alive." From my coat pocket, I pulled a small white rock and set it gently beside the folder. She used to keep them in her purse, said they were for silent promises. One for every time she vowed something quietly and kept it anyway. This one was mine. Back at home, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I hovered the cursor over the red folder on the desktop, named Etta Truth, and hit delete. It didn't feel like erasure. It felt like release, but I didn't get rid of everything. The letter she wrote me, that first spark in all this, I left in its frame, still on the bookshelf, still sacred. Later, I lit a candle, not because of grief, but because of gratitude. She gave me something even now, strength I didn't know I had, and a path I didn't realize I'd walk. That evening, as the last of the winter light filtered through my windows, I sat by myself and let it all land. Not with tears, not with bitterness, but with peace. Justice isn't always a judge. Sometimes it's a room full of people hearing a story that almost got lost. Forgiveness may never come from them, but that's not what I was after. Peace doesn't require their permission. And as I stood to close the window, to put on the kettle, to step back into a life that finally belonged to me again, I understood something I hadn't been able to before. They didn't erase me. They just taught me how not to disappear again. Sometimes, the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who raised you, the ones who share your last name. But silence isn't strength, and love isn't loyalty when it's used to control. What would you do if your own family tried to erase your place in someone's final days? Would you fight back, even if it meant standing alone? If this story moved you or made you reflect on your own family story, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more true, powerful stories that dig deep into the heart of what family really means.